Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Rogue Insider Podcast. I know I haven't done an actual interview in about a year. I've just been reading you guys' books, which is what I like to do, which is fine. But we're back with Ari Freeman. His book that we talked about in the previous podcast has been released. There will be a link in the description. I encourage you to buy it. Pragmatic Magical Thinking, Real Magic Explained. Welcome back to the podcast, Ari.
Thank you very much.
What is the starting place? I guess people who are interested in what we've talked about before can go back and listen to the previous podcast that we did.
Yeah, the first one was a good introduction to the way I think and what I've been writing about.
Yeah, so we don't want to duplicate that.
Sure.
So let's start with the book.
Yeah.
And then just follow the conversation wherever it goes from there outwards.
Have a look at the chapters and see what we haven't covered.
Okay, so the chapters in the book are on attention, a definition of magic for our times, useful fictions, a pragmatist's approach to skepticism, memory, narrative and identity, believing different things on different days, outside voices versus inner voices, spirits, why you aren't just your brain, magic is around us every day, the origins of modern science, the fake war between science and religion, science's on and off again relationship with magic, science, magic and religion compared, the origin of Christian fundamentalism, religion's suspicion of magic, the witch trials, the cycle of creativity and inspiration, ladder cosmologies, the Kabbalist cosmology, the chakras, the Sephiroth and chakras compared, magic and morality, superstition, and smart people traps. So in our first discussion, you talked about how you wanted to make a explanation of magic that wouldn't repel people who are inherent and committed rationalists.
Oh, the thing with magic is if you're going to get into it, your worldview will change. But how do you present it to people in a way that they're not going to reject it outright? Because there's a lot of people, and I get to listen to the book, we don't have one set of beliefs. In our head. We have a muddle of beliefs based on different sub-personalities and different roles we play.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people who are simultaneously extremely curious about magic and this kind of thing, and the esoteric world and the spiritual realm, but are also committed to science and sometimes committed materialists, this kind of thing. So there are types of information that are legit in the scientific realm and in the academic realm and things like this. And of course they undergo change over time. But the way I see it, skeptics, in the sense of skeptics from a scientific standpoint, care about science. They don't mind history, psychology, and anthropology. So those are the kind of four departments, if you like, that I've used. Yeah, and there's a reason that I haven't gone to a university to do this book is departments are not inclined to talk to each other or get along. So I thought I could go and do a PhD in magic, but I don't think I can get four departments to talk to each other, so I'm just going to write a book.
I'm not convinced that the interdisciplinary studies departments are quite that open-minded just yet.
Yeah, exactly. And I know this from friends who have done PhDs.
Yeah. So there's a science meme that chemistry is applied physics, biology is applied chemistry, and psychology is applied biology.
Exactly. Like, what is the psychology?
Yeah. So where does the study of magic fit into that?
Well, it comes down to this. Science is seeking to be objective. It's trying to make the best predictions by measuring the world. This is totally fine. This is good. It's solid. It gets you as close to objective as you can. By the way, objective is not something you can achieve. It's only something you orientate towards. And if you talk to real scientists, you'll find that out. There's unfortunately sometimes a gulf between real scientists and science fans of science TV shows and that sort of thing.
Well, I don't feel the need to perform any genuflections
No,
to
cool.
the scientismists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what's magic trying to do? Magic, I argue, is living in the intersubjective space, which is the place where we can share experiences. Magic is not concerned with explaining the world. It's whatever explanation that magic uses is a means to an end to get the thing done. But science and magic have in common that they are both trying to get repetitive things done in the world. So real magicians aren't just farting around being useless. They are hopefully keeping notes, and they're testing themselves. It's just that the thing that makes the test work is that they can produce the experience over and over again. Cool. So, for instance, in my book, I discuss the fact that you can do science on ghost experiences, but you can't actually measure a ghost most of the time. Though some people try. Yeah.
Some people think they've found something, but
what are the ghost hunters with their lovely little machines picking up electromagnetic radiation and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's all data. But magic's more about, can you produce the experience over and over again? So is there a haunted house? Does everyone who stay at the haunted house experience the ghost? It's like, can a skeptic stay in the haunted house and experience the ghost, or do you have to have been made scared of the ghost before you see it? And you try and get all of these things out of the way of magic, in my opinion, to be a good magician, as well as you would for a good scientist. But there is no way to objectively measure a ghost most of the time. Yeah. So magic and science actually have a huge crossover, but magic is intrinsically tied to trickery. So I argue that stage magic and occult magic and sort of traditional magic are actually all in common. That's not to say they're exactly the same, but they're all in common. The magic is not the trick. The magic is the results of the trick. So a stage magician is doing real magic because they're able to create the experience of, say, a lady being sawn in half. And because you can do that over and over again, and it works on everybody. And very, very, very few people are capable of seeing how it's done. Then that's a real type of magic. You've manipulated the perception of the audience, and that's the definition I use in my book, so I can compare all these different things. Now, people might protest and go, well, if it's a trick, I want the real magic, the stuff that really works, or isn't a trick. It shouldn't be a trick. It's like, I argue, well, a hang of a lot of your perception is a trick. And science tells us that. So the other thing, science is trying to build models to explain the world. Magic is less concerned with the models being totally consistent, though some have tried. There are systems like Kabbalah and the chakra system and things that are trying to build a cosmology of the types of human experiences you can have. And I think they've done a good job. And in fact, they influenced the people who became eventually scientists. So those are built on some of those cosmologies anyway.
Yeah.
Or started there. Science wants to build models of reality, and it's very hard if you're a scientist doing tests, even if you get really good data. If your data shows something that doesn't fit into the current model, it's very hard to get the science establishment to accept it. And that used to be less of a problem in science than it is now. Science used to be more anything goes than it is now. And if you want to, we won't go into it too much, but read Paul Feyerabend's Against Method if you want to have your illusions of science shattered, and if you think it's an all-encompassing thing that will get us all human knowledge, that's a really good book to read about what the limitations of science are. And if you want to be a scientist, definitely read that book so you can be a better scientist. Does that kind of make sense? So the explanations of magic are generally just a means to an end to get the magic done, and for that reason it can look a lot more fruity and freaky and artistic and flowery and weird and silly sometimes.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean you can't get repeatable results.
So Carl Jung said that one of the problems with studying the psyche is that it's very hard to get firm evidence because you can't pull a thing out of your head, show it to other people, measure its width, put it back in, and then compare those widths with what you've pulled out of other people's heads.
Yeah, and
so
it's
is
not
there
clear it's even in your head in the first instance.
Well, is there a similar dynamic at play with the study of magic?
Well, while I don't believe that you can explain all magic away with psychology alone, it is, again, the best place to start. Because while not all magic can be explained with psychology, all magic involves some psychology. So you might as well get that out of the way first. Because we're better at doing psychology than we generally are at doing magic in our culture.
Yeah.
And our culture is 21st century New Zealand Pakeha, and for you and me in this case.
Yeah.
People are wondering.
I think the accents probably give it away. So do you feel like the project was a success?
Yeah, well, people are reading it and enjoying it, and there's been lots of people saying, I thought it'd be good, but it's really, really good. So, it's working well, and it's a hard thing. Yeah, when I said, and I think you said to this, you said to this to me in the first podcast, I said, I'm writing a book about magic for skeptics, and you said good luck, and a few people have said that, good luck, and it's like those same people seem to be really enjoying the book. And so a lot of my motivation is like, well, why shouldn't have anyone tried this? And no one had, so I felt I needed to write the book. And I think it's good. Having written the book now, I have a slightly different worldview than when I started, having done a lot of research to get it done. So one thing I'm waiting on is enough people having read the book that they can tell me what they're interested in next, because I have ideas for 3 more books, and I've started research on all of them. But which one I'll get finished first depends on a little bit on feedback I get from people.
And what are those 3 projects that you're considering?
So if you were a skeptic and you're interested in magic and you have a curiosity about it, but you don't know how to think about it to even get started because you're like, there's something there, I don't understand it, everything I know about magic comes from fantasy films, then my book is for that. While I give you a few things to try in my book, it's not a magical primer on how to do magic, though it definitely gives you things to try, and it definitely points you towards books and things you could start. So the next book would be, well, given that we've framed magic in a way that we can definitely discuss it in the modern world, that points out that, contrary to popular belief, we do not live in an age bereft of magic. We lived, I argue, in the most magical age of all human history, an age where we go on the internet, a space of an incorporeal space where you express your will, and that is non-temporal, non-spatial. So the next books could be Ari tries out all the magic and reports back, and gives an overview of the Western magic tradition from the point of view of the pragmatic magical magician. Pragmatism being the philosophy put forth by William James especially, that you should ground what you think is true and real in what you can actually do in the world. So if it produces real change and real results, something about it is true, regardless of whether that explanation fits, or the explanations for everything you do elsewhere. So that's the first book. Is sort of like, okay, we'll discuss magic, let's do some, or let's look at everyone who does it. Another book, I have 2 chapters about spirits, framing them in terms we can understand, because in the past, for instance, we have this idea that that we have soul, mind, and body. And I think we got screwed up somewhere in history, because if you go back a certain time, nobody really talks about soul, mind, and body. They just talk about body and this thing which is we call mind and they call spirit, or they tell me that there aren't, in alchemy and that sort of thing, there are not 3 parts to the universe. There's just a continuum between matter and concepts and ideas, which means that ideas and your thoughts are spirit. If you want to know what the spiritual plane is, it's the place you're thinking in. It's not all the spiritual plane is, but a compartment of the spiritual plane is the place where our minds are and where we think. You know, and if it being in the spiritual, just thinking in your head is the spiritual plane, a part of the spiritual plane. And therefore, you know, all the concepts flying around on the internet are directly linked to the spiritual plane, the interconnection of minds. So from that point of view, a lot of the things we do in the modern world and a lot of our ideas are spirits, or to do with spirits and interactions with spirits. So yeah, so a possible other book is to go through all the different categories, or explore the different categories of types of spirits experiences we can have and how they relate to things we do in the modern world. Cool. And the third book may seem a little bit off on a tangent from this, unless you know me really well or you've read my first book, which is a book entirely about music and why science cannot ask very good questions about what music is, or can't explain it. And I argue that we are framing music wrong to do any actual tests on it. And you would go, what does that have to do with magic? I think music is literally magic. You can charm people into dancing with the right song, just as you can charm people to going along with what you want to go along with the right spell. And I think songs are spells, the spells that work on your mind, and they can get stuck in your head, and they can try and sell you things, and they can make you think certain people are cool, and all sorts of stuff. So and the foundational point of that is music is not sound. And this is, I think, where science gets screwed up. Music is an experience involving, amongst other things, the auditory cortex of the brain that piggybacks on that apparatus. And sound is the medium that is usually presented to us too. But music is not sound, because you can get a song stuck in your head without any sound having produced it. So yeah, we've had Mr. Crowley stuck in our head this morning, and I'm trying to think. It's because we had a big long conversation about Aleister Crowley last night. At no point have we heard in the last 48 hours the song Mr. Crowley.
That's right. So
like, where did that come from? So Victor here started singing there, and it wasn't sound that produced it. And when he's singing, the music is the experience in his head, and when he's singing, he's bringing it down to this plane where he can share things on. If that kind of makes sense. So
it's going to make
yeah,
vibrations.
Let's go. So yes, a whole book about music, or a whole book about spirits, or a whole book about the Western magic tradition framed in ways that people who've had a materialist, skeptical upbringing can make some use of it. Those are the 3 options.
Choice.
Yeah.
Okay, I think some people are going to have the response of, isn't all of this just an elaborate metaphor?
I mean, I want to be cheeky there and say, well, aren't elaborate metaphor's often the best we can do to explain the world around us anyway. I mean, like, can you refine the objection?
Well, the difficulty is that I think that language is an elaborate metaphor, and that because language is our homeland, we are never capable of getting outside of it. But if I try to honestly present the objection, it would be something like, you are not actually describing the world being different, you're merely changing the description of the world.
Oh, okay, so I'm just I'm defining magic so widely that I can include all my favorite things in it. Is that it?
That's not what I was saying, but
No?
I imagine some people would probably have that objection too.
I'm not the first person to do this, and my definition of magic, by the way, my definition of magic is in order to explain it to skeptics. So once you read my first book, even the definition can be tweaked. But the ability to manipulate the perception in accordance with the will. And that might seem like, some people might protest and go, that's a very wide definition, or you're just changing what everyone thinks magic is in order to incorporate all your favorite things in it or whatever. Crowley said that every willful act is magic. Every willful act. So I would like to propose that my definition is much narrower than his. And my definition is a mere tweak from Dion Fortune's definition. Magic is the art of causing changes in consciousness in accordance with the will. So mine is exactly the same. It's just that in order to incorporate scientific thinking and put to look at the way magic interacts with a scientific worldview, consciousness is a problem, because when Dion Fortune was around it looked like, we'll know what consciousness is, or we'll get a closer idea, but we're stuck. It's called the hard problem in science. So, but we do know what perception is. That's much easier to frame. So I'm just tweaking it a little bit towards what we can more easily frame. And then when you look at, so I'm like, well, isn't magic like breaking the rules of the universe or the sort of thing? Most of these definitions have nothing to do with what magic practitioners use to define. So when you look at them, they're doing something way more like causing changes in consciousness, or so the most woo kind of definition of magic that magicians still utilize frequently would be that you can negotiate with the reality to line itself up to you in certain ways to get certain things done, like to make it, you can't outright win lotto, but you can improve your chances of winning lotto. So other magicians I've taught to say, who are trying to modernize it, trying to frame it in terms for modern people, will say that magic is probability manipulation. Yeah, I've heard that quite a lot. And so, cool, and like, that's certainly not, I still have a lot of time for that too. The idea that you can push or shove, or like nudge the universe your way a little bit more. I've got time for that too. And that's certainly what people report when they go through like the Western cult magician. They do report all sorts of crazy coincidences happening after magical experiments and things like that. But it's just, I don't think it's the best place for a skeptic to come in first. I think it's the best place for a skeptic to get into after they've explored all the way that the things around them can be framed in terms of magic, if that makes sense. Yeah, and then you should get into things like parapsychology and stuff like that.
Right.
Which is, fascinating field, because they keep producing data that is absolutely scientifically valid, but on the other hand, never like incredibly dramatic. So it's like if you don't count parapsychology experiments, like experiments on whether people can be telepathic or that sort of thing, when you really look at the literature, it's better than chance over and over and over and over and over again. But it's only better than chance by
it's
so
never
like 5 to
conclusive.
10%. But a lot of things we hold dear are only have that level of success rate anyway. So the unfortunate thing is, if you're a hardline skeptic, that's not enough to convince you that you can nudge reality your way by just negotiating with it, by using spells or whatever. But on the other hand, it's not quite a win for either team. Let me put it that way. It's not like a perfect goal, but it is intriguing. It suggests to me that neither side is framing it properly, and a third thing is going on. And if we understood what the third thing was, we'd be much better at magic than we are now.
Yeah. Not to drag us down a rabbit hole.
No, it's all good.
But do you think that we won't have a complete explanation until we solve the hard problem of consciousness?
Yeah, I get into that in my book. That's the chapter that you put forth. Why you're not just your brain. Again, we're framing the question wrong. You will not find a human being entirely in the head, because it's not all stored there. And what I mean is, consciousness is not a thing, it's a process. So we're having conversation, so there's an element in which I'm affirming your reality and you're affirming mine. And we are in a space now, what I call the intersubjective space of shared experience, and this is being shared by the people listening to us. But if I was throwing a ball, I'd be projecting my consciousness out towards the target, and if I was cutting my fingernails, it would be absorbed in this small place around the fingernail. And the realm of, like, the range of human experiences, you can get right up to Brahman, like extended all, and you're not an individual anymore, you're attached to everything in the universe. So it's like we're constantly reaching out. So our very memory requires things in the outside world to remember anything. They're like memory keys. These are called context-dependent memories. And so, for instance, I argue there's a real sense, and it's a little bit of an allegory, but it's still a real sense in which, like, a shopping list that you take to go shopping is an extension of your memory and offloading onto the outside world of some memory to reduce your cognitive load. And when you go down that rabbit hole long enough, you realize, well, you don't even need to keep a full map of your body, because your body's there. You push against your body and it behaves a certain way. Like, you don't need to model a bicycle in order to ride a bike. The bike takes care of the things it takes care of. You just push against the bits you have to interact with, the pedals and the handlebars. And the bike responds to you, and you respond back. So a lot of what we think of as our memory is actually in the outside world, not in our brain. So if this is why people start to go haywire if you put them in isolation. That's why you get into an isolation tank for a reasonable amount of time. Your brain will, instead of reducing the amount of brain activity, because you don't have to process the things in the outside world, it fires up. It starts to feed back on itself, and people can have psychedelic experiences. People who, and this is a very cruel thing to do to someone, but solitary confinement in prisons, it really unravels people. It really starts to unravel some of the things that make us function as humans, and they get something called prisoner's cinema, which is hallucinatory lights and things that eventually take on kind of narrative form. And
yeah. So, I imagine a similar dynamic is occurring when people are in anechoic chambers.
Yeah, certainly by taking the stimulus away, rather than depleting the amount of processing you have to do into your head, your brain amps up the amount of processing it has to do in order to compensate for something it has been relying on to help it understand where it is and who it is. So consciousness. So we are definitely a long way from science understanding what consciousness is, and this is because it's not asking very good questions, and part of that is that the materialist paradigm is a bad one for understanding what's going on in the head. And this is not because there's this other layer of reality where souls hang out that's like a different kind of physical. It's that our environment is not just physical objects, it's concepts. That's how we evolved to be for our environment to be conceptual as well as physical. In fact, I argue we never see the physical world directly at all. We always see it through some layers of concept. And yeah, this is why solitary confinement's a problem, because even social interaction with other human beings is the context, part of the context that makes you a human being. And if you take enough of those contexts away, the thing you end up with at least looks like a broken human being, if not starting to not look like a human being at all. And we talked about this with the other podcast about AI and simulated worlds.
Yeah.
To simulate a human being perfectly, you have to also simulate their body. And part of this is because not all the processing you do is in your head. You have neuronal centers elsewhere. There's one around your spine. There's one around your gut called the enteric nervous system, and there's one around the heart, and they all do processing. Like the one in your brain is by far the biggest one, but the other ones do processing. So if you knock enough of those out, you're starting to decrease what you can process as a processing organism. But people go wrong even when they don't have enough social interaction, like people in solitary confinement. So there's an element, so we need an environment. So to get a perfect simulation of a human being, you have to emulate enough of their environment. And part of that is also their social environment. And it's sort of like, how far do you have to go before you've just emulated the whole universe?
Well,
you don't have to do that much, but you need to go somewhere into emulating the whole universe. Yeah.
My hunch is that you can't make a human being without making a circumstance that produces a human being.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, if you can't produce the environment that produces human beings, you're not going to end up with them.
So maybe people think I'm being a bit nitpicky, but I do think this is at least going to throw up many problems. And I am not saying we will never understand consciousness in scientific terms, but we're coming to an end of a materialistic age. Like, even in physics, materialism's breaking down. And what I mean is we were hoping to find the substance that the entire world is made out of. And we were hoping that by studying the smallest things, we'd be able to explain the whole of the universe. But it stopped working. Like, we get down to electrons and we find that every electron is connected to every other electron in the universe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand physics, but
yeah.
I'm told that in some sense electrons don't even really exist anyway, so...
They don't go through time and weird things like that. So like there's a...
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to take that at face value. But it seems to me that if we're interested in addressing the problem of consciousness, a good place to start would be to familiarise oneself with with other varieties of explanations that have existed in the past, including panpsychism, Neoplatonism, animism, these varieties.
There are now panpsychist physicists.
Yeah.
And that was something that would have been laughed at, even a couple of decades ago. And this is because we go to the smallest things and we find this interconnected fields that seem to go back to the top of the diagram again. Yeah, so...
Well, maybe this is cruel of me, but I find panpsychists to be a little tepid.
Oh, why is that?
Like, it feels like dipping your toes in the pool rather than just stepping into the pool.
So what would be stepping into the pool?
Listeners of this podcast will be aware that one of the things I've been doing is reading Vinus's Philosophy as a Rite of Rebirth, that first chapter, to the audience. And if we accept the suggestions that Vinus puts forward, and if I've understood them correctly, all of existence, whether it be conscious or material or any other variety of type of thing, are all reflections of an original, ineffable substance.
Okay, so I sort of agree with that, but I'll put it in different terms. We are incapable as organisms, as human beings, to see the whole picture all at once. So we're constantly climbing up and down this kind of ladder of reality, and in my book I call these ladder cosmologies. And it's like you can go to a rock concert and so enjoy jumping up and down with all the other people that you don't feel like an individual anymore. You feel like everyone feels like everyone. Or you can be in a situation where your individuality is, you're hyper focused on your individuality, but we're incapable of we're incapable of having our perception be in the total abstract, like a Brahman type experience, or like total interaction with matter. And I argue that kicking your bare toes against a rock is the deepest affirmation of that.
It's an important magical exercise.
Yeah. So yes, I agree. There is something else going on of which the way reality unfurls itself to us is veiled. Like now the question is, will we ever be able to understand that? Because we certainly didn't evolve to be able to understand it. And science shows us this plenty.
Okay. What are the major things that you've changed your mind about from the experience of writing the book?
Oh yeah, that's a little hard because let's have a think about that. I think I've just come off more and more reports, more and more extremely intelligent people who are 100% committed to things like the spiritualist worldview and everything. So like previously, I guess previously when before I wrote the book, I assumed that that you could pull a lot more magic into the psychological explanation of things. And I now think that if you actually want to get good results, you have to, at least for the duration of the experiment, sometimes adopt the worldview of the people who created the experiment. I think sometimes that's very important, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
And in doing that, like definitely, if I think anyone who starts as a daily ceremonial magic practice, for instance, will and any engagement with magic, if you hadn't had it before, you'll find out the first thing you'll find out is things about it work. The second thing you'll find out is that it's completely different than you thought. It's not what you get in fantasy novels, and it's not what skeptics push it off into the corner. And if someone is not getting results, it's very, very frequently that they're framing the whole thing in the wrong way. And because we have all come across deluded people. We've all come across people who think they're psychic who aren't really.
Yeah.
But what most people haven't done is had their own little psychic experiences by playing with it and things like that. So these things happen, like you do. There's a big, strange things can happen, basically. Do you know what I mean? And when they do happen, the way they happen is not. It's not the way that the people who make fun of them present them.
Yeah.
Something quite different. Like for one thing, I think I was talking about this with my friend yesterday, who's a magician, and this might just be my personality, but personally, I've never been spooked by magic, even though I've had a lot of strange things happen. So this idea that it's spooky and scary is really because people are comparing it to what they've been told from various religious groups that they're growing up in. And religion is right to be scared about magic, because religion is about keeping people together in groups and under a common doctrine. It's about the group focus. And magicians are individuals who want to meddle with the rules of consensus reality to see what they can get away with. And like, those are the people who are most threatening to a group trying to stay together in common doctrine. So there will always be tension between magicians and religions. And yeah, but I've never... It's often weird. Things frequently happen that you can't explain, that don't fit a materialist worldview. But, like, I've never met... Yeah. It's like... So, for instance, someone is psychic. There are people who appear to be able to do psychic things. Like... But however, there's no psychic who can know everything. It's not a way to break the rules of the universe. It just means the rules of the universe are slightly different than most people think. Like, there are limitations to all psychics. There's things that psychics can't know. They can't pull anything they want out of your head. Sometimes they can. It's just that occasionally, sometimes they can pull things out of your head. That's the wonderful and strange thing about it. But it's not that they can rifle through your head and find what you've been masturbating to or whatever. Like,
so does that mean that you're willing to go further than Jung would have gone in his idea of meaningful coincidences?
When you're doing magic, you need to do it on the terms that it works, if you want it to work.
Yeah.
So, and another thing that I probably frustrate people on is people want to pin me down, and I'm saying, no, and this is what my book is about. It's you're trying to get things done. What is real is the things you can get done. How you think, your model of how you think they work should be a means to getting them done, not... You shouldn't try and funnel all of reality into your model. You should always be willing to change your model in order to get the things done you want to get. So if you want to find out if you're psychic, then you have to try and read people's minds. If you think reading people's minds is impossible, then how are you going to find out if you're psychic? I mean, it's kind of that simple.
One of the things I've done over my life is I've been committed to the idea from very early on that you can't understand an idea unless you inhabit the worldview that produces that idea.
Yeah, I argue you have to start that way. So if you want to understand, if someone making a claim, you need to start by trying to repeat the experiment. So like someone can call a spirit down, and you really want to understand it, you need to play the game by their rules first, so that you really understand what it is they're doing. And then you should try and take it apart later. Like, I'm still a skeptic.
Yeah.
But just don't walk in with a completely different worldview and get upset or call bullshit because the thing doesn't fit your prejudices. You actually have to get rid of your prejudices, find out what the person means by what they're trying to do, find out how they explain it to themselves, explain it to yourself the way they're explaining it to themselves, see if you get results. When you get results, then you can start to explain it in different ways. Generally what I find is that it's not exactly the way the true believers say it is. Like, there's always a little bit of wishful thinking, but the results are frequently real and genuine, and therefore it's not the way that would fit this prejudice of the skeptics. I almost always find there's a third thing going on, and I guess that's sort of my mission, to try and come up with good explanations for that third thing going on, so the next person can more easily do the experiment. Yeah.
So is it, in a sense, that skepticism is a variety of acidic perspective that prevents itself from finding
No,
I was looking for.
No, I am a skeptic and I believe in skepticism. I just think most of the people who call themselves skeptics most of the time are not being good skeptics.
Right.
They're mostly walking around the world naysaying and dismissing and looking for reasons why things are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, that is still a useful set of skills for mankind.
Sure.
But if you have not looked for any reasons why the thing is right, then you're just going to miss out on learning about it.
Mm.
It's like, find reasons why it's right. Like, you got to look for reasons why it could be true.
Mm.
And only then, if you get results, then start trying to take it apart second. Yeah.
My experience of inhabiting different worldviews, if a person really commits themselves to transferring to a different worldview, which in my experience takes about 6 months or so,
Sure.
Is that when you inhabit that worldview, the world responds according to
exactly
the worldview. Now, and not always, but all worldviews, generally speaking, exist because of reasons, and the reasons why those worldviews exist. How do I say this?
You can get different things done.
It's because they're viable in some sense. So when you're inside a worldview, an event occurs in the world, you interpret that event occurred according to the explanations that are apparent to that worldview, and that is a viable and workable perspective. Now, there are some worldviews that are more workable than others. Yeah, some of them tend to lead people into problems. But if we understand that occurs, and this is why you can have people who have completely different worldviews, but their societies and their people their organisations continue to prosper in the world. Which, if there was one single truth and there was no, then you would expect everybody just to think that one thing that is true.
Yeah.
Because if you move too far from the truth, you would become an unviable entity or organisation or person and just be discounted.
And what I have found, and what I suspect everyone else will find, if they are charitable enough to take on the worldview of other people and understand on their terms, that each different worldview allows you to get different things, slightly different things done in the world, and that the worldview we have is not necessarily the best one for getting all things done. So if you're not getting what you want out of your life, then try changing your belief system. Belief systems are definitely filters of reality. And what if nothing else, it will change the opportunities you see in the world and the things you see that to be avoided.
Yeah. I would assume that this should be obvious to anybody who spent some time in one culture and then spent some time in a different culture.
Yeah. Or was raised in two. Yeah.
So that's it. So there's, as far in my interpretation, there's no woo-woo in this. This seems completely
no. This is still just like psychologically accurate, but except that like cultures who talk to spirits can get some freaky things done.
Yeah. So things that we don't have explanations for.
Yeah. Exactly.
Perhaps I'm being a pragmatic reductionist Anglo here.
Yeah.
But my immediate instinct is to go, okay, well then what we need to do is get all of the worldviews, analyse them, take the best bits of all of them, cludge them together into one sort of complete and absolute dynamic results getting device, and then inhabit that permanently forever.
Well, that will help because you'll get rid of some bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the question is it possible to have a perfect worldview? And probably not.
No, in the same way that you can't see all of existence.
Yeah, exactly. But you can have a better one. You can definitely get rid of the trust that's not helping anyone.
So one of the things that chaos magicians talk about is being self-belief manipulation, so that you can believe something into existing whenever you want to do that, and then later on you just believe some other thing.
Yes, believing different things on different days is one of my chapters too. Perfect place to start messing around with magic and pragmatic magical thinking. That is the magical thinking that actually produces real results. It's not necessarily the best place to remain if you want to become a better and better magician. Sometimes you have to start really committing to a tradition and letting it work on you, and therefore change the way you think, because you can't get all the best results just by dipping your toes all the time. Some of these things do take commitment. But it is, if you're like not sure about magic, then chaos magic is the one of the best and best entry points and the easiest ones to get into.
So I can't in good conscience recommend chaos magic without also providing a warning, which is that if you get good at self-belief alteration, it's very easy to become a person who deceives themselves, and then you just live constantly in a constantly cycling churn of your own self-desire and pretending that you, and very soon, and it's easy to spot people who are like that because they're always right and everyone else is always wrong, and you know, all that kind of thing.
And that's what skeptics, naysaying skeptics, are warning us against, and they're right.
So obviously don't become one of those people. That would be a terrible development.
That is the primary danger of all magic, is not that you will be attacked and eaten by devils, or your soul would go to hell, or any of that. It's that you'll delude yourself really badly in a way that that diminishes your opportunities to act in the world. And so how do you avoid that? Well, the way I avoid that is by being as open as possible so that people can call bullshit on me if I'm doing something.
And the way I try to avoid it is to try to commit myself to self-honesty in the most brutal and discompassionate terms.
Yes, that too. So like, if something doesn't work, no matter how much you want it to be true, you must let it go. And this is what I've learned from being a musician and a performer. It is not the audience's fault for not enjoying the piece of music you played. Being a good performer is providing the audience with a novel experience that they're going to enjoy, and allowing them to go along the journey, and you taking responsibility and risk. So if you play a song that you liked and the audience doesn't respond, then I'm really sorry, but just in that moment you were a bad performer. And that some people might find it harsh, but it's what you have to do to become a better performer, is go, okay, what did the audience need? Now, this does not mean that the audience needs Wagon Wheel every night. Because a lot of people are really sick of that too. They need something new. They need experiences that they haven't had. They need the right amount of novel and the right amount of familiar. But it also doesn't mean, it's also the reason why you can't just play free jazz to most audiences and have them really enjoy it, because it's not enough for them to grasp onto. You'll get 3 people going, finally, something really out there, and the rest of the house. And that's a decision. You'll never reach all the people all the time. But if it doesn't work, you must get rid of it, no matter how much you're in love with it. The
audience is right.
The audience. If you're a performer, there are individual dickheads in audiences, but there is never a whole audience is wrong. You just did the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong context, or you got hired for the wrong gig. But it's not the audience's fault. they didn't organize.
No, you don't understand. They just don't appreciate my elevated sense of.
Okay, so this applies to being a magician in some ways even more. You know, it's, if it didn't work, it didn't work.
With the world playing the part of the audience in this example.
So it's very, that's the most present danger, and the thing that most often goes wrong with magic is that people end up doing all their magic on themselves, and it becomes a feedback loop. And the way to tell that is, other people stop responding to you, understanding you, enjoying your company, and or you stop being able to produce any useful work in the world. And I'm sorry, we are temporary. You won't be around forever. So at some point, something you do, the things you do, have to serve other people at some point, eventually. Cool.
That's good.
Any other questions, or we could wrap up there too?
All right. We're only an hour in. It seems a little short.
Okay.
But that's a good part one.
Okay, part one.
And that was a beautiful line to like end part one on that you gave us.
Cool. Oh well, look through the chapters again and see what else.
What's with the Toyota?
Yeah. So on the front of my book, we could probably link to some sort of image. On the front of my book is a red Toyota Corolla superimposed on the Sephirot from Kabbalah. And a lot of people ask, why is there... It's a book about magic. Why is there a picture of a mundane car on the front of your book? And it's definitely a cheekiness. The Sephirot is a cosmology for explaining human perception, human experiences, and the way that the world presents it to itself. And Kabbalists would say it's the diagram of creation itself. And in front of that is this mundane car. I argue if you want to understand the depths of the universe and you want to put yourself in a paradigm where you can start to get magical results, don't start by doing the freakiest kind of sorcerer dressed in robes kind of occult craziness. Start with something really, really mundane and simple in your everyday life that's really clear. Makes the results really clear. So if you were to buy a red Toyota Corolla, a very stock standard kind of car on New Zealand roads, you will start seeing red Toyota Corollas everywhere on the road. You'll start seeing them multiple times a week. Is it because you have altered your perception to notice something that's always been there, or is the universe lining itself up to you to send you a message? And I argue that you choose one of those based on what you're trying to get done. If that makes sense. And the mundane is absolutely the ticket to understanding the extraordinary. And this is the right attitude to have as a magician, not to go in and going, how long until I become Merlin? It is, how can I, in small, subtle ways, alter and safely alter my part of consensus reality.
Are you familiar with Robert Anton Wilson's coin experiment from Prometheus Rising?
Yeah.
Do you recommend that?
Yeah, absolutely. These are great things to try.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how I got onto it, but one day I was in when I was a teenager, I think I was 14, I just started messing around with my conception of reality, and I decided to spend one day finding everyone as beautiful as possible, just to see how arbitrary my sense of human aesthetics and lust and whatever it was. And by the end of the day, I was super excited by, oh, that person's really good looking, that person's really good looking, that person's really good looking. And then the next day I decided to try and find everyone repulsive, and it was awful.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. And it showed me just how much framing things differently, just basically all magic starts with focusing your attention in one way or another. Yeah. And those are small things,
Yeah.
It's not mind-blowing stuff, but you don't get to the mind-blowing stuff without that, in my opinion. You certainly don't get to understand it.
How malleable is the self?
Well, it depends on the person, I guess, is what I would answer with it. I mean, everyone's been shocked at their own behavior at times. So more malleable than we often give ourselves credit for it.
Mm.
Yeah. So in stage magic, like mentalism, for instance, like things like Darren Brown's experiments, and it shows that there's a range. Some people are more malleable than others. One of the things they do if you go to a mentalist show is they will quite possibly get someone out beforehand to warm up the audience, and that's how they'll present it to you. We're just warming up the audience before the celebrity mentalist comes out. Can everyone stand up? Can you touch your nose? Can you sit down? And they put you through a set of arbitrary, like, group exercises. And they go, cool, thanks. That's it. And they walk up and they don't really tell you why. That the magic experiment has already started. The spell's already begun. They are trying to find who is most susceptible. What is it? Who in the audience is most susceptible, is most, I've lost the word, but most easily affected.
Pliable,
yeah. And those are the people that the mentalist will focus on. Mentalist will be observing what happens.
Yeah.
And it's because there exist, really pliable people, but there also exist extremely prickly people who just don't want to do what they're told.
Yeah.
And they'll make the show more difficult. You tend to want you want to invite people on stage. It is showbiz, so you want to invite people on stage that people enjoy watching. So you want so people who go along with the experience. So those people, a lot of people think that they don't want to be the pliable person. They want to be the steadfast person who's always themselves and is really self-assured. But like in the Big Five personality test, for instance, that they use in psychology, it's one of the major ones they use in Canada and United States. That at the moment, the people who are more pliable are the same people who have a lot of friends and get on socially better, because mimicking the body language and stuff of the people around you sets them at ease, and they like you more. So prickly people are really useful to have around, the naysayers and everything, but they're much harder to get along with. So don't be so sure that you want to be someone who isn't socially pliable. There are some disadvantages.
Well, yeah, it's always good to have a spread of people, right?
Yeah.
A spread.
Yeah.
Is there anyone that's absolutely pliable?
It appears so. It appears some people really...
Yeah. And so that would suggest that those people, if they endeavoured into the realm of magic, would be able to completely rewrite themselves.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you known people who have had dramatic personality shifts?
From magic?
Or, like, as a personal act of will, have decided to become different people?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In the wider... Yeah, absolutely, I have.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you don't even recognise them anymore.
Yeah. Well, that implies that the level of flexibility of the self is higher than most people would credit on face value.
We sort of have this illusion about who we are, and it's sort of a necessary illusion to get things done in the world. But yeah, we're all more pliable than we think we are. Yeah, and so the thing is, like, I want to do the magic without being changed. It's like, no, you can't. The first thing that will change in any act of will is that you will change yourself. You can't hold a loaded gun without being changed. You can't have a credit card with $1 billion on it without being changed. It's not possible. And if you want, actually, money's a good one. Go look up accounts of people who won like $20 million in lotteries. Nobody comes out unscathed, and it's actually people have done studies and shown it's a pretty it's actually very, very, very dangerous to win $1 million. $20 million.
Yeah.
It's very, very dangerous. And these people frequently end up with a broken marriage. Some of them commit suicide. It's, that you think you can just have money without affecting your personality. You can't. It's gonna change the world. So all power changes the world. So go into magic instead, being willing to have it have an effect on you first. By the same token, you cannot curse people without becoming more paranoid yourself. I'm convinced of that. And if there is any morality of magic, that's where it comes in.
Is there a morality of magic?
Yes, there's some inbuilt morality of magic. And it's just that if you use all your magic to mess people up, you are opening the concept of being messed up yourself. So a prize boxer, a champion, is always in fear of being defeated. Whereas the average person isn't worried about that. Do you know what I mean? So all power, the person who's best at the strongest man in the world is most afraid of becoming weak. Yeah.
Going back to the question of self-change, in my interpretation, people are constantly involved in these cycles or these interrelationships, what you called intersubjectivity, I think, of everything that's around them. So, in my interpretation, winning $20 million is a radical change to your existence, but no change, or in one specific element, but no change to the systems that you're involved with as a human being, what I think of as the expanded sense of self. And so it will start to change those over time.
Right.
And this kind of supposedly unearned boon, or this unearned supposed boon that has arrived, will likely swing out all of those patterns that you're involved with all the things that are around you.
Yeah.
So that the fact that many people are destroyed by winning money is an interesting fact by itself.
Yeah.
But it also implies that once we become aware of these interrelations and these constant ongoing intersubjective relationships we have with everything and everyone around us from the perspective of this expanded sense of self, those things move from being in the realm of the unconscious, because we never think about them and think about ourselves as a single unit.
Yeah,
Instead, they come forward into the space of consciousness and therefore become capable to become available to being manipulated by acts of will.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It's like some people have a heroin addiction, and the only thing saving them from killing themselves is that they're too poor to buy the amount of heroin they want. Do you know what I mean? So you got to be careful with the power, like what the right amount of power in one context becomes dangerous, and then when the context gets changed. So, like, as soon as if that heroin addict wins lotto,
they're dead.
Well, they have to gain more discipline to survive. Like the amount of discipline they had that allowed them to survive at one level becomes dangerous at the next level. So, sorry if this is freaking everyone out and is a bummer, but think of it this way instead. Go into magic seeking to change yourself first. Let it act upon you. And it's what we're talking about with belief systems. Let the belief system have its effect on you and see if it changes what you believe in the world. It's like the chances that you'll be sorry about it are low. Like, yeah.
Did we discuss personality cut-ups in the last podcast that we did together?
I don't think so. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that.
Personality cut-ups is a good way of illustrating this example.
Yeah.
Illustrating this principle. An example is a person who travels back and forth between London and Berlin, right? They spend some of their time in
Yeah.
one place and one place, some of it in another.
Yeah.
They decide, as a quote-unquote personality cut-up, that they are not a jogger when they are in London,
Yes.
but when they are in Berlin, they are a jogger.
Yes.
And so when they're in Berlin, every morning they get up at 5:30 and
Yes.
run
Yeah.
10Ks and then go
Yeah.
home. And in London, they never do.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
all do this.
Yeah.
We all have roles that we play in life that are contextual, and we all have different belief systems attached to those different roles. So my example is, in my book, is someone is a police officer and a parent. To say they're a mother and a police officer. They have to have different things they do in the world and different beliefs. So when they're a police officer, they have a certain amount of authority and things they're allowed to do, and there's things that will get them in trouble. So they would be a very bad parent if they treated their children like potential criminals. And they'd be a very bad police officer if they treated potential criminals like children. Okay. So the question then is, how do you stop one set of belief systems and one role invading and fucking up another part of your life? And that's where ritual comes in. So the uniform of a police officer, and police officers who have really difficult beats and things will sometimes talk about this. Like, I was listening to a guy on National Program, which is our big journalism program in New Zealand on the radio, and he he was in a police station, and he was the only police officer in the police station, and there's a few of those in small towns around New Zealand. And they said, when you finally do get time off, which can only happen if another police officer comes from a naming station and does his job for a couple of weeks, what do you do? And he says, I have a farm that is a small lifestyle block farm that is an hour and a half's drive from that small town. And when I do that, I just ride horses and muck around with the garden and stuff. And he says that it takes that entire hour and a half journey to change from one role to another, because he's on call all the time. So he's a person who has trouble letting go of the police officer mentality. So he's created this ritual of completely changing the space he lives in, and when he's there, he tries to disengage, and so that's his ritual, is an hour and a half drive to it, and having set up this house. So a ritual, like you can, and this is where magic comes in. It's like, well, aren't I going to go off the deep end if I change my belief system in order to do some magic? It's like, no, if you're doing the confines of the ritual, then you open and you invoke the powers or the concepts that allow you to do the thing, and then at the end you close and you banish those concepts, and then you can go back to doing what you were doing before. And that works. Rituals are that powerful that you can enclose belief systems in the confines of a ritual, and actually they're there in religions like the Catholic Mass and like the transubstantiation, like drinking the wine and the wafers that are the blood and the body of Christ. It's like, well, you don't go around eating. It's the exception that makes it powerful. You don't go around like eating people normally. So, but in the confines of the ritual, that's fine. Yeah. And the cognitive dissonance is therefore dealt with. Like, you don't have any, because you only have to believe it's the blood of Christ in the confines of the ritual, and then they close it at the end. Does that make sense? Yep.
Some people are really dismissive of Sunday Christians, but actually they're really strongly implementing this principle.
Absolutely, yeah. Which is why so much occult magic is borrowed their rituals.
When I was in the theatre, we had something which was very similar to this, but an extremely simple version of it.
Yeah.
Which was that the lecturers at the university theatre were very aware that being in the place of constantly putting on personalities, inhabiting them, or being inhabited by them, depending on how you see that, and then taking them off again, can be problematic to the psyche.
Absolutely.
Because if you don't actively take a moment to take them off, then when you leave the theatre to go about the rest of your day, the personality that you're quote unquote pretending to be can stain or burrow or leave a mark on or continue to inhabit you and slowly wears off over time instead of just being taken off.
Just look at accounts of method actors.
Well, most of them go crazy by the time they're old, unless they have a really good way of solving this issue.
Of closing the ritual,
Yeah. So what we did is just pretend that you have a person, like a little piece of paper person, folded up in your pocket. You take the piece of paper out, you unfold it into the full person, you drape them over yourself and become that individual.
Yeah.
And then at the end, when you finish the performance, you take them off, fold them back up, and put them back in your pocket, and then don't think about them again until next week.
Exactly.
You do it all again.
Exactly what I was suggesting with uniforms, like the police's uniform. Exactly. When they take it off, they'd also take the persona off and the role off.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, I understand that there are laws about what you can do in uniform and what you can't do in uniform.
Mm-hmm.
So the actual legal thing of it is also has some attachment to the ritual of taking the uniform off.
Yeah, the role itself is legally protected.
Yeah.
Because it has a specific place in the society.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's really interesting that even such a simple little act of will as, folding up a piece of paper and putting it on and taking it off can achieve this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, but go out and believe different things on different days, but compartmentalize them.
Mm. Okay, good. What else do we want to talk about?
Having a look.
Alchemy?
Yeah, we were talking about alchemy earlier. How do you want to frame that in the terms of how it's different to science, or what its relationship to magic, or what do you want to know about alchemy specifically?
What is it?
What is it? Cool. What it is not is baby science. It's not what it is. Alchemy is a worldview that encompasses what chemistry and medicine, what we now think chemistry and medicine, but it is also a how do you sort of call it, a spiritual system for elevating the person, in the sense that, like, it involves meditation on a later cosmologies, in the same way that people who do yoga meditate on chakras. Well, alchemy was intrinsically tied to Kabbalah in most cases, and there is a meditation system that takes you up and down experiences in there. So, and then it's not reductionistic. It believes that reality is a spectrum, from the most abstract to the most concrete. So, and you cannot be an alchemist with a materialist worldview. So, ideas are just as real as objects, and yeah. So, for instance, here has how, this is usually my example I give, this is how alchemy is different to science. So alchemy certainly gave birth to chemistry, but if you were trying to do a chemical experiment, it is completely kosher and normal in alchemy to summon an angel to help you finish the chemical experiment. But scientists tend not to do that. They try and keep everything within the confines of matter. And alchemy, matter is alive and information is alive, and therefore the universe can be negotiated with. And the refining and purification of metals, say gold from ore, is also akin to the refining of oneself in meditation, getting rid of the dross of one's personality. And in fact, doing the experiment is a meditation which helps you become a better human being. And we don't think about chemistry that way much anymore. So it's kind of a leap for modern minds, but when you do start to get a grip on it, it's very interesting, and it certainly puts the current age in a whole new framework. Does that rhyme with what you understand about alchemy, or?
I don't really understand alchemy, to be honest.
Don't really understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, what is that? All right, let's go deeper. With the
Yeah.
3 things that we've talked about so far, what does that imply that the universe is like at the ontological level?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the ways that science has wrapped around in a way that has ended up agreeing not only with alchemy but with all the Eurasian perennial philosophies.
Mm-hmm.
So they ended up with this thing called the Big Bang, which was actually first put forth by a Catholic astrophysicist who was also a clergyman. He was a Belgian guy, I forget his name. So in Hinduism, before there was anything, there was Brahman, and that is a state of undifferentiated, endless potentiality out of which everything comes, and the first act of creation is an act of differentiation, a separation. That is called the monad in the ancient Greek mysteries, some of the ancient Greek mystery schools, or the night by the Orphic mysteries, or it's called Ein Sof in Kabbalah, which is the primary cosmology used by the alchemists in the West, and by the Muslim alchemists too. There were Chinese and Indian alchemists, by the way, who had different systems. It's in Polynesian mythology, it's called Tepo, the night. Exactly the same thing it's called in the Orphic mysteries. And so so the cosmology of modern science is before there was anything, there was no time, there wasn't exactly any space, everything existed in a single point. And the first thing that happened was a separation and an expansion. And then suddenly there was time, because suddenly there was change. I mean, it seems a little bit incredible that we've wrapped around to the same origin of the universe. And by the way, this is an ongoing process too. And science says this too. If you try and take a jar and hermetically seal it, and you take everything out of it expecting to find nothing inside, you will find the universe is still endlessly popping into existence, in and out, bits of energy pop in and then immediately disappear too quickly that they make any mess. So it's impossible. We've never created a true state of nothing. Every time we try and create a state of nothing by taking all the things out of something, there's more stuff in there, and we get to the point where the universe we can just see the universe making itself, in a sense.
Just frothing.
Yeah. So in this sense, the atomist kind of worldview, or like we've wrapped around to arguably the same cosmology that we started with our mythology. And this mythology is the same mythology you'll find in half the world's population, cultures. It's North African, it's American Indian, it's Asian, it's European, and it's Polynesian. Yeah.
If I understand the kind of Rig Vedic beginning of the world, that's pretty much the same thing. Although what's interesting about the Rig Vedic approach is that they don't say that things occurred, they just ask the question, what if it was like this? And they have a bit more of a kind of prognostication type approach. They'll say things like, contemplate this, where did the God that created the universe stand?
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, which is
when there was nowhere
pleasantly
to
humble.
stand. Yeah.
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 And also, as Divinus has showed us, the sort of hieratic Egyptian or potentially Orphic world basically fits this model.
Yeah. So this is the model that alchemy had, and we've come back to it. For a while, science got away from it, now it's sort of back. And this is why I think this and many other reasons, and it might be too much to get into in this podcast, but why I think science is finishing up with true materialism. It's no longer tenable.
So does this mean that you're endorsing perennialism?
What I am endorsing is, okay, there is the problem. Our dominant worldview no longer serves us. Science itself is showing this. We don't have a better one. The last really good one we had was alchemical. like that's, and if you're a Westerner, then that's the last time we had a non-materialist worldview that was deeply functional and allowed us to get things done in the world. So until someone comes along with a better meta-narrative and is able to explain it to everyone, all we can do is go back to the past and tweak it to what we've got now.
The problem with all return philosophies, of course, is that if you return to something, that all that does is set up the conditions to return you back again to here.
Well, we know a lot. We can do better science now, so we can know the things that they were wrong about, and alchemy, and the things that we're right about. So, okay, and alchemy, and by the way, alchemy is not nearly as silly as it sounds. It's just the things they got wrong were often not conceptually wrong at all. They were just misunderstood the amount of work that would be required. So here's an example. People make fun of alchemy for believing that they could make gold out of other elements in chemistry experiments. So and this is actually what gave alchemists a bad name, is that charlatan alchemists, of course, came in and said, yeah, if you give me a little bit of gold, I can use that as seed gold to create a lot of gold for you. And this is part of the reason that alchemy became illegal, because these grifters came in and started charlatans and it started ripping off kings and courts. But they were actually completely right. You can transform one element of matter into another. It's just you need a large hadron collider to do it. We have, on Earth, scientists have changed lead into gold. The amount of energy it requires is more than the gold is worth. That's all.
Yeah.
As a concept, it's totally sound. The alchemists were correct. They just didn't understand the amount of work. And a lot of things, when you look at it like that, a lot of the things they were into were correct. But they misunderstood the boundaries or the amount. So the danger of just repeating their mistakes, like we have so much knowledge. Like I'm not anti-scientist. The scientific age has given us so many boundaries and ways to understand the world and things. And well, here's an example of the way the previous worldview just was flat out wrong. There are ways like the ancient Greeks onwards and the alchemists all assumed that there were spiritual, like the complexities to type life forms. So they thought that plants were less complex, were less complex than animals, or less complex than human beings. And when that's just plain false. A tree is not simpler than a human being. Not in its behavior, not in what it's trying to get done, not in the way it senses the world. It's just really, really different to a human being. And I don't know, I think a lot of people today still get annoyed at me for stating such a thing, but go look at plant biology and you will see it's right there. Plants get up to all sorts of stuff, they just do it slower than we do, but they also often live a lot longer than we do.
Well, if I'm hearing you and understanding you correctly,
Yeah.
then it seems to me that science is no barrier, and the spiritual implications of the Big Bang and the Large Hadron Collider essentially return us to an Orphic worldview, and that there's no
But this time,
there's no barrier in science to doing that. In fact, it seems like the logical result of it.
well, that's why we're getting panpsychic scientists now,
Yeah.
panpsychic physicists, because they recognize that materialism is not tenable. So your objection was, if we go back to the alchemical worldview, then we will get stuck in the same way as the alchemists. And I argue, no, we won't exactly. It will be a little different this time, because science has taught us to redefine the boundaries around these things are. So certain things have become reined in, and certain things have become wide open for more exploration. So until we get another meta-narrative, it's like, this is the best you can do. And I do think the alchemist had some really valuable stuff. I do think it's ridiculous to say that matter is more real than concepts, for instance. I don't think that makes any sense.
Assuming that there's a listener who has completely bought this hypothesis, what is the method of, what's the quickest and easiest way to move from where we are now as materialist nihilists into the alchemical or Orphic world?
As in, what information's out there to get started? Or how should they work on themselves?
Both of those are good.
Well, the best, if you want a recommendation, go look up Dennis William Hauck's stuff. That's Hauck, Dutch name. He's an American alchemist who was trained by a Czech alchemist, and he's the best I've come across for explaining the alchemical worldview to modern people in short, succinct terms. And one thing he's good at, alchemy's got two problems. Chemistry tried to reduce it to matter alone, and it's not only dealing with matter alone. And then people like Carl Jung, who I love, but he did mess this up, decided that he used alchemy as his main framework for discussing the psyche, but they come along with like psychological alchemy or spiritual alchemy, which removes the matter. Well, that destroys the alchemical view from the Renaissance as well. Dennis William Hauck shows you on his YouTube channel, shows you on one of the videos, he does the experiments, and then he talks about what their spiritual implications are, and he says you can't take the chemistry out of the spirituality, and you can't take the spirituality out of the chemistry. You miss the whole cosmology if you do that. And it's not that spiritual alchemy doesn't give you any returns, but it just assumes that it's all about explaining the psyche, and it's about explaining the whole framework in which the psyche and the spiritual and the mind integrate with matter, and the ways they integrate with matter, and and I think we need some kind of shock to the scientific worldview like that and until we do that, we're not going to ever understand what consciousness is and things like that.
Okay, so the other implication of perennialism is that it seems as though any direction that you go into any tradition, some variety or some form which rhymes with what you've suggested will probably be in there somewhere.
No, because it's not. It's just what half of humanity has gotten up to through human history.
Right.
There's Australian Aborigines have a completely different cosmology, and you might go, well, it is wrong to say that theirs was unsuccessful because they survived in a really outrageous landscape for 65,000 years. This has got to be considered a success. The sub-Saharan Africans have a different worldview. The Andaman Islanders have a different worldview. The Melanesians have a different worldview. So it's not, the perennial philosophy is really, really, really widespread, but it's not all of humanity. And this is another reason that Carl Jung is probably wrong. It's not just archetypes that keep popping up. There are archetypes, like everyone has a mother, and therefore there's a mother archetype. But a lot of other archetypes that are thought to be universal are not. People don't even all have fathers in all cultures. Some cultures do not keep track of fathers at all, and everyone, all the males that raise the child are uncles, and fathers don't join the family.
So that would imply that archetypes are cultural rather than species.
There are some universal archetypes, but Carl Jung and what's his successor who did all the mythology stuff? The Power of Myth.
Campbell,
Joseph Campbell, who they were onto something, but Joseph Campbell was right about all the Eurasian cultures, but he didn't study like Australian Aborigines and things enough to realize how immensely different their worldview is. So no, it's not that we're always going to get back to the same worldview. It's not the only thing humans can do, but it certainly is an incredible worldview that has lasted and been successful. And it seems to me like we're going to get back to something a bit like that.
So okay, so then which paths lead to something that fits within perennialism? Alchemy.
Yes.
Orphism, if anyone can figure out what that was.
Yeah.
Egyptian hieratic religion.
Yes.
Platonism and Neoplatonism.
Yeah.
So, and depending on how you interpret things, basically just Greek philosophy.
Yeah. The North American Indian religions.
Yep.
Like all the Mayans, all the Kro, all of those.
Vedic Hinduism.
Yes.
What else?
The Polynesians.
Yeah.
So it's the same.
Okay. All right. Well, what about Catholicism and Orthodoxy, Judaism and Protestantism?
Especially Christian Orthodoxy.
Orthodoxy, you think, is a path to the perennial philosophy?
Yeah, I'm still learning about it, but there are mystical schools within that too that teach on a similar line and have a similar later cosmology, and
okay.
It is there in Catholicism. It's just Catholicism's been beaten around a bit more. Like,
my hunch was that when Catholicism and Protestantism ditched the medieval worldview, they likely ditched the sort of Orphic inheritance as well. There's
a lot of it still intact in Catholicism, but it's I think it's more intact in Greek Orthodoxy. Yeah. I think Protestant Christians, some still have it, especially the ones that start to get influenced by mystics, but some lost it. So like Christian fundamentalism is certainly a gross perversion of what Christianity has been all through human history.
Okay, and Western occultism in the sense of Hermeticism?
Yes, so the Golden Dawn and Theosophy, Crowley, who is extension of Golden Dawn, and all of the old Renaissance grimoires and medieval grimoires, and going back to the Greco-Egyptian papyri, they're all of these things have a highly, highly relatable perennial philosophy, singular worldview. Often it takes a while to translate the terms to really understand. Like it takes a while to get takes a bit of, like the terms can change. So the Greek philosophy has logos, and it takes a while to realize that the Egyptian heka is describing a lot of the same phenomena, things like that. So sometimes it can take a while to see the similarities, but when you really get into it, it's there.
I know another really good source.
Yeah.
Pragmatic Magical Thinking, Real
Thank
Magic
you.
Explained by Ari Freeman.
Thank you very much.
Also, keep listening to the Rogue Insider podcast. See you later.
Good.